Thank you for the introduction. I'm sure you guys are probably happy to know that I'm not talking about TIF this time, 'cause it seems like when I'm usually in front of you, it is about tax increment financing. I thought I'd start today with just answering some questions that I've already received today as I walked in the door. Those of you who haven't seen me for a couple of months know I haven't been forced into the witness protection program. And as far as I know, I'm not going through a midlife crisis. But a couple months ago, I didn't have any meetings, so I let my hair grow out a little bit, didn't shave for a couple of weeks, and my wife looked at me and said, "I kind of like that look on you." So we've been together about 27 years now, or this month, have our 20-year anniversary next month, and my wife will be first to tell you that I'm slow to take on her cues when it comes to things, but I did catch up on that one, so if I look a little different than what you last saw me, that's the reason why. So you can blame her for that. But I did want to talk about local income tax. I was asked to talk about that today with you this afternoon. And a number of you I've talked to you in the past, been to a number of public meetings. And this is coming more and more popular as a revenue source for us to look at. So again, we were asked to talk about this afternoon. Again, it's becoming more important to fund your local government, your budgets. And one of the main reasons why is it seems like every conversation that I have in every public meeting, we always talk about circuit breaker and the challenges that face communities, municipalities, and specifically counties, even more so here in the last couple years as you're starting to eat away at those cash balances that you may have accumulated for a number of years. Again, for local income tax, another reason that's becoming more popular is it provides some diversity. We're kind of getting more and more away from property taxes and looking at more at other revenue streams, and that local income tax is one of those options. Again, I wanted to hit on circuit breaker because I know that is something that's a concern for all of you, and it's going to be an increasing concern. This is a schedule that we did for Stark County. We did an analysis for them last year, and they'd asked us to kind of look at their assessed value and their tax rates because they felt like their assessed value was going, they were cutting their budgets, but they were still getting hit hard by circuit breaker credits. And this graph kind of shows what has happened historically for them, and then also where they're projected to go based on some of these assumptions. So this graph right here shows for, again, Stark County as an illustration. We showed that gross levies were going to increase by 2 to 3%, and I think in your last class we talked about maximum levies and budgets and how that grows each year. So you think that that's a positive, that 2 to 3% growth, almost 4% here the last couple of years, that's going to help you. That's going to help you increase your budget, help increase the services that you're able to provide. But the other variable to that factor is your tax base, your assessed value. So in this assumption, we assumed that for Stark County, their assessed value is going to grow from decline 0 to 2.5% from 2019 to 2021. And then 2022 to 2025, we're going to see a modest growth of their tax base or their assessed value from 1 to 2.5%. So whenever you have your assessed or your budget, your maximum levy growing faster than your tax base, that's going to increase your circuit breaker losses. You're not going to really benefit or see all the benefits of that increased levy. And that's what many counties are facing right now. And that's why a lot of counties are seeing similar trends where circuit breaker is going to be increasing over the near future. And one of the reasons why we're going to be seeing that, there's a lot of variables that go into your tax base, as you know, but one that is changing and that we are aware of is the farmland and how it's assessed. As you know, that calculation was changed a couple years ago, and this schedule just shows how the assessed value per 1 acre of farmland has decreased. In 2010, it was 1,250 of assessed value per acre, and then it started gradually increasing until it hit its peak in about 2016. As you can see, it's now on its decline. So again, as that assessed value, as a lot of counties are rural, and that's really having an impact on your assessed value, therefore having an impact on your tax rates, and therefore increasing your circuit breaker. So we see this trend actually continuing. So the goal for counties is to try to grow its tax base in other ways. But as you know, that's easier said than done. And because it is difficult to increase your tax base, that's why I think a lot of communities are looking at local income tax, more so than they have in the past. Again, the local income tax, it's a tax on the adjusted gross income. In 2016, all the income taxes, there were about 7 different local income taxes. They were consolidated into one income tax, which I'll explain here in a little bit. The new law gave you more flexibility, gave counties, municipalities more flexibility in how those rates could be adopted. It actually increased the amount that you can rate, increased the amount of levy that you could raise, and also gave you more flexibility in how that can be used and how it can be distributed or allocated amongst the different units. Just a little bit of history for those who've been around for a number of years. We used to talk about CAGIT, COIT, and CEDIT. Those are kind of the old local income taxes that have been around for a long time. CAGIT, or County Adjusted Gross Income Tax, was capped at 1%. The county option income tax was also capped at 1%. You could adopt one or the other, but not both. And then you had your CEDIT, your County Economic Development Income Tax, which is capped at 0.5%. And you could adopt a combination of CAGIT and CEDIT or COIT and CEDIT at those different caps there. And those income taxes were around for a long time and just had those as options. And then there were some other local option income tax adopted, or you're allowed to adopt later, the County Economic Development Income Tax or the Homestead Credit, which many counties adopted. That was about 2000, I think 2002, you were allowed to do that, and that was when inventory assessed value was eliminated. The legislators knew that by reducing or eliminating that tax base, again, that was going to reduce your revenue, so they gave you an option to make up that revenue by adopting this income tax. And it was capped at 0.25%. And then there's always been this special purpose income tax rate that you could go to legislators and ask for a special rate for a special project. Many jails, courthouses have been funded through the special income tax rate. And there's really no limit on what that rate could be, just was whatever was approved by the legislators. And then that lasted for quite a few years, and then came along circuit breaker credits. And again, legislators knew that this was going to cause a burden. They didn't realize how much burden it was going to cause, but they knew it was going to cause a burden for communities. So they gave you additional options and gave you 3 more local income taxes that you could adopt at the time. The levy freeze, up to 1%, property tax relief, up to 1%, and then public safety, up to 0.25%. And then as you know, originally you could only adopt the public safety if you adopted one of the others. That was changed because a lot of communities, they, again, didn't want to increase their tax any more than they have to, but they really needed that additional revenue of the public safety. So the law was changed where you could adopt the public safety without having to adopt the other 2. And then by 2015, all 92 counties had adopted at least one form of income tax. And then in 2016, like I said, the legislators tried to make things more simpler, tried to look at all those different local income taxes and combine them into one tax, or LIT. Again, it maintained the same revenue as you received formerly. Could be used for the same thing as it was before, and it required no action from the county. If you just wanted to continue as you were, it just moved on from 2016 to 2017. There was no required action. But when they combined the local income tax, they created 3 separate components. One was the expenditure rate, and then within the expenditure rate, it was broken up into different buckets. The first 25% that you received, if you're a CAGIT county, got distributed to the schools, because that's where the schools received 25% originally. Then you allocated it to certified shares, public safety, or economic development. And then I'll talk a little bit about the correctional and rehabilitation facilities. That was a new kind of bucket that the legislators put in place or allowed for this year. So that's kind of a new bucket that will be in place, and you could adopt this year for 2019 if you so choose. The other component was the property tax relief, and then the third component of the new Loit was a special purpose. This graph I put together just to kind of show you the number of counties that have adopted each. Yes? It'll be the council or a local income tax council. And a couple slides later, I'll distinguish between those two. Be a good question. On this slide, I put together kind of a summary just to show you the number of counties that have adopted each specific component and then what the highest rate is. So for the property tax relief, there's 60 counties that have adopted those rates. The highest is 1.18%. There's 86 different counties that have adopted the certified shares, so 86 of the 92. The highest rate's 1.81. Public safety, 63, which that's kind of growing in more popularity here the last couple years. And the highest is 1%. And the economic development, 74 different counties, 0.6. And then the special purpose rate, 23 different counties have adopted that, have gone to the legislators and have adopted a special purpose rate for a specific project. And in this slide, I know it's hard to read, but it just kind of shows you the variance between, if you look at the far right, the 0.35% of the different counties that are involved, and then what total rate that they have. So the rates, the 92 counties, you have one county that has a total rate of 0.35%, and then on the other extreme, you have a county that has a 3.38%. And the other counties are somewhere in between. So you can see it's a wide range of where counties are. And just from going from 17 to 2018, I believe there were 18 counties that increased their tax rate from one year to the next. So again, it kind of shows you where counties are kind of needing to find other revenue sources. The budgets are just outweighing the amount of revenue they're getting from property taxes, and they're looking at local income tax to try to fill that gap as best they can. As far as the question was as who actually adopts these income taxes, it really depends upon what county you are, if you're a Cadgett County or a Loit County previously. If you're a Cadgett County, then the county council would adopt any change, whether it's an increase, decrease, or reallocation. If you're a Loit County, or we're a Loit County, then it's the county income tax council. And the county income tax council is made up of members of the fiscal bodies of the county, the cities and towns within the county. And then each one gets a vote, one vote per the percentage of the population. I'll go through an example here in a minute. And then if you were a county that had just adopted seated historically, then it would be whatever body that adopted that original seated tax. So if it was your county council that adopted the seated tax, then they would be the ones that adopt this new tax or any changes. If it was the income tax council that adopted the seated tax, then they would adopt any new tax or any changes. So if it is the local income tax council, again, it's based upon population. So I've kind of put an example together what that would look like. So example, if you had two cities in a town within your county, City A had a population of 22,000, City B had a population of 30,000, the town had a population of 13,000, and then the rest of the unincorporated county had a population of 35,000 for a total of 100,000. If each entity received a vote based upon its population, City A would receive 22 votes, City B would receive 30 votes, Town C would receive 13, and the county would receive 35. And actually to pass any kind of change, you have to have the majority, so anything over 50%. So if there was a change in this illustrative county, you'd have to at least have City A and City B join in together and approve that change, because that would be over 50% of the votes. So if the county wanted to do it, if the county wanted to change, increase the public safety tax, for instance, but the other cities and towns were not in favor for it and voted against it, the tax rate wouldn't pass. Again, you have to have over 50%. So again, this is a schedule that we had did for St. Joseph County, looking at that very thing that they're looking at changing their rate, so we did the calculation. Again, so it would really take the city and Mishawaka would be able to pass the rate, even if the county was against the rate. If those two cities went together and approve the rate, that rate would pass. This schedule right here I put together that kind of shows you, again, kind of how rates have changed over time and the new buckets. The property tax relief on the left side, the maximum rate is now 1.25%. If you remember, historically, the tax rate was 1%, so now it's increased to 1.25%. So in this case, looking at Stark County again, its current rate down toward the bottom is 0.6, so they could adopt an additional 1.19% rate if it chose to. The expenditure rate there in the middle has a total tax rate of 2.5 that you can go up to. Again, it has the different buckets. It has a total rate right now of 1%, 0.5 made up of certified shares, and 0.5 made up of public safety, so they could adopt another 1.5% in any one of those buckets, whether it's certified shares, public safety, economic development, or the new correctional rehabilitation facility. Because that new legislation that was passed this year, I'll talk again more about it, but it falls within your expenditure rate. So if the county were to adopt that rate, it couldn't go above that 2.5%. So if you already had something that was public safety and certified shares and seated that had the 2.5, and the county wanted to adopt this 0.2% for the correctional facilities and rehabilitation, they'd have to reduce 0.2 somewhere else within this expenditure rate. And then Stark County has a 0.65% special purpose rate as well. And again, there's no maximum on that, it's just whatever is approved by state statute. Now I'll kind of go over the different expenditures buckets in a little bit more detail. The first one again is the property tax relief. It's used to fund a credit to reduce property tax liabilities. The adopting body will specify how the revenues will be applied to this tax credit. So basically the adopting body can decide who receives that credit and how much. And again, the point of the property tax relief credit is you apply this credit, it reduces their tax liability, reduces their tax bill, and therefore reduces your circuit breaker credits. So that's how it can benefit the county unit as a whole. The property tax relief rate, it can be applied to different categories of taxpayers. It can be applied to just those at the 1% cap, the homesteads. It can be applied to real property that hit the 2% cap. It can be applied to all other residential property that are not the 1%. Or it can be applied to just the 3% cap commercial property, or a combination of any of those above. Or it can be done uniformly, where you apply to all of them on an equal basis. And those percentages can be different between each unit. So you could apply 80% of your credit to homeowners, and then 20% to uniform, where everyone else gets 20% of the credit. The county has that flexibility, and that's one analysis. If you're looking at doing this property tax relief, or if maybe you have this in place, you may want to look at it again, because you really want to apply this credit to those who are hitting the circuit breaker credit, because that's really where it's going to benefit the community. There's one county that we worked with recently. They were one of the first ones to adopt the property tax replacement credit when it was first an option, and really not knowing, I mean, it was new to everyone, really not knowing how this was going to work, how it was going to impact different taxpayers. They adopted the way they went up to the max, the 1%, but they applied 80% of their credits to the homeowners, and then 20% uniformly. Well, what happened is you had a lot of taxpayers that were paying very little in property taxes because they were getting such a large credit. I think their credit was around 65%. So they were, I mean, literally homes paying basically nothing in property taxes. And that really wasn't helping the communities, the cities, the school, and the county, because they were giving such a large credit to people who weren't hitting the caps. So those industries, those taxpayers like commercial properties, and especially in the cities that had tax rates over $3, they were getting a very small credit, and it wasn't helping them with the circuit breaker, which those were the taxpayers that were really hitting the circuit breaker hard and reducing the amount of revenue that the counties and other entities were seeing. So that was one thing that the county had us look at was, okay, what if we change that ratio going from 80% residential to 20% commercial to something 60-40 or 50-50 or something else that would start giving credits to those commercial properties and help reduce their circuit breaker credits and reduce the circuit breaker losses that the county and the city was receiving. So that's something that, again, as this is getting popular, and many of you have made changes in the last couple of years, I think it's important to evaluate every couple of years your current situation, because things are changing constantly, and what may have made sense a couple years ago due to your tax base, due to various things, it might make sense to readjust some of those rates. And that's what this county did. Yes? Well, in that case, and this is one of my things I'm going to be talking about at the end, is when you do those things, you really do need an analysis on what the impact would be. Because in that community, kind of going back to this slide, they didn't have any public safety at the time. And their budget, again, it was the county who was kind of initiating this, but really all the units, especially the city as well, major city in the county, were really hurting from their budget. And they really wanted to adopt that public safety to help relieve some of the pressure on their general fund. So that what they did was they adopted a 0.6% public safety rate. But they didn't want to, again, it was a new tax, additional tax. They wanted to try to ease that burden on taxpayers. So what they did was they reduced their property tax replacement credit, the far left. Again, because they kind of increased I think the public safety by 0.6%, and then decreased the property tax replacement credit by, I think, 4%. So the overall increase in your income tax was only 0.2. Again, trying to, I believe, help the taxpayer out by not having such a large increase. But what they didn't realize, I think, and what happened was they reduced the amount of credits that taxpayers were receiving. That county, again, we were also looking at changing. They were at 80% credit to residential, 20% to uniform. We changed that to 60% to 40%. Just by doing that for a taxpayer in the city, we were estimating that the tax bill would go up about $150 per year if they just changed how the credit was applied. But by also reducing the amount of total credit that they received from 1% to 0.7%, there were some taxpayers that saw their bills double in size, going from about $1,000 a year to $2,000 a year. And there's a lot of variables, and each taxpayer was impacted differently. But those are the kinds of things that you really have to analyze, because what you do can really impact a community. And in that case, that scenario wasn't ran, so they really didn't know the impact of what would happen if by reducing the property tax credit. Their overall goal was to try to help the taxpayer by not having such a burden on the income tax, but then what they did was having a much larger impact on the property taxes. Does that help answer your question? It was a very complicated, there's a lot of things going on there, but it's a good scenario as far as just a little tweak here and tweak there could have a major impact on a taxpayer's tax bill. And you guys will be the first ones to hear about it. So this is kind of, I put this together, this slide. This is we did for Vermilion County. They were also getting hit hard by circuit breaker credits, and they did not have a property tax replacement credit in place. So they asked us to look at, what would be the impact if we put one in place. So you can see the blue line there. That was kind of the baseline. That was what their actual circuit breaker was. This is for the county. So in 2018, they were losing $427,000 due to circuit breaker. And we actually projected out the next, I think, 5 years, that we just showed 2 years here, that based upon historically how their assessed value has grown, what we think would happen in agricultural land, what their circuit breaker would be like if they did nothing. So again, in 2018, their circuit breaker was $427,000. We estimated that in 2019 it would go to $509,000 if they didn't do anything, and then $585,000 by 2020. And again, really the reason for that increase is because their tax base was not growing as fast as their maximum levy was. So then we ran a couple of scenarios as what it would look like if they did apply a 0.25% credit rate, or a 0.5 or 0.75 or 1 and 1.25. So you can kind of see the different bar graphs. In 2018, if they were to apply the 0.25% credit, their circuit breaker losses would go down from 427,000 to 343,000. So down $84,000 by applying that credit. And then you can kind of see the various colors there. If they were to go all the way to the max, the 1.25%, their circuit breaker losses would go from 427,000 down to 119,000. So basically, they'd reap another $308,000 of additional revenue that they otherwise would have lost by putting this tax rate in place. And then we just showed the impact going forward, because just wanted to emphasize that the issues that they're facing now, based upon current trends, they're only going to magnify. The next component is the expenditure Loit. Again, it's broken down into various buckets: the certified shares, public safety, and economic development. And there's a new one now, again, the constructional and rehabilitation facilities. Again, counties have the option, against the county council or local income tax council, has the option to allocate their rate amongst those buckets any way that they would like. But again, if it's a Cadgett County, they have to adopt the first 25% or it gets distributed to the schools. Because prior Cadgett counties, that's how it was distributed, so we didn't want to take anything from the schools that had previously received. But other than that, what's left over can go to any of those three buckets. Also part of the expenditure rate that I did want to hit on is the levy freeze. I know there are some counties out there that do have the levy freeze rate. It is part of your expenditure rate. So some counties continue to increase that each year. So just keep in mind that as you increase that, you're kind of taking away from that 2.5% that you have available for other rates. Again, that will continue till you hit the 1%, but you do have the option to rescind it or reduce it now, as long as you make that revenue up from really increased property taxes. Kind of a levy thaw. They're going with the more traditional certified shares. Again, that's really kind of what I would call your old Cadgett, old COIT. Again, that can be used for what it was used previously. I mean, from your perspective, you really didn't see anything different, except maybe you had to call it something different in your fund. But again, the certified shares, the second point there, it's adopted and distributed to all civil taxing units. So cities, towns, counties, townships, libraries. May include solid waste districts, if they so choose to desire. The second bucket is the public safety. Again, this law hasn't changed. There's a list of, and it's pretty broad, pretty flexible in what that can be used for, but again, it can only be for public safety. But again, it's just given to or distributed to counties and municipalities, so it's not distributed to townships and libraries. And then again, I'll talk about this a little bit more, PSAPs. There is an option where you can take the first part of it and it just goes towards PSAPs, and you don't have to distribute it to the other units. Yes. Yes. And the question was, can the public safety be used for buildings or capital projects? Yes. And the answer is yes. The next question is the PSAPs. I know that this is a question that I get a lot as I attend a lot of county meetings is we have PSAP, we have operating issues, we have capital issues, we'd like to increase the tax, but we don't want to have to distribute this to all the other units because we need that revenue for this particular project that actually benefits the entire county. So there is an option where you can, local income tax counties can adopt a PSAP rate, and it's part of the public safety expenditure rate, and all of that goes first to help fund the public safety, and then anything after that would go through and flow through to all the other entities. Something that they allowed just a couple years ago is if you were a county, but you're the deciding body that makes that decision is the local income tax council, and you don't have enough of the vote yourself to pass that, you're kind of out of luck. You didn't have the option to vote for this public safety tax that could just go to PSAPs. So they changed the statute, I think 2 years ago, that allows county fiscal bodies, so the county council, if you're part of the Loit council, but don't already have a rate set aside just for PSAPs, the county council can adopt its own PSAP rate up to 0.1%. So that's something that could be very beneficial for you, because I know that that's a operating cost that can kind of drain your general fund. So this is a new revenue source that you could adopt. Again, it's part of your expenditure rate, but you'd be able to collect all of that off the top and not have to distribute any of that portion to the other cities and towns within the county. Something else that we're asked a lot, again, this public safety tax. Again, it's for public safety as it states, but there's a lot of fire departments, volunteer fire departments that don't get any of those, don't get any of that distribution, because it only goes to the county, cities, and towns. They do have the ability to come before the adopting body, so the county council or the Loit council, and ask for a portion for that year. And it's only good for 1 year, so if they want something the next year, they have to come back the next year and ask for it. And then the tax council, and there's kind of, let you read here, there's some deadlines that have to be met and when that can be done. But the local body can adopt a certain portion of the revenue they receive of public safety just towards these entities that provide public safety. But that amount comes off the top. So if you have a township fire station, or a township that wants to buy a fire truck and needs $200,000, they go in front of the county council and say, we need $200,000 for a fire truck. The county council says, that's fine, we'll get to you out of public safety. When you get the county auditor gets the distribution each month, they have to take that share off the top, and then what's left gets distributed to the other units. So that's something you have to be careful of, because when you're giving money away to the township, you're really giving money from all the other units as well. I would also say that once you do that, you're kind of setting a precedent, so be prepared that if one township asks, there will be others. The other components, the economic development. Again, not much has changed here. Really nothing has changed what you could use it before. Same thing here. Same requirements are applicable here, where you have to have a capital plan. States what you're going to do with 75% of the revenue. Again, it's only distributed to cities and towns and the county. So what I put here, if you're looking at increasing your tax rate or changing your tax rate, this was Vermilion County that we did this for again. We looked at, okay, if they wanted to increase their tax rate, we looked at various options, looking at increasing their certified shares or increasing their public safety or seated. So this first schedule here looks at certified shares. And again, certified shares goes to the county, the cities, towns, townships, and libraries. So kind of looking at the far right, the 1%. If Vermilion County were going to increase the rate to 1%, their total amount of revenue that they could increase county-wide is about $2.4 million. The county share of that is about $1.5 million. And then the rest of it's allocated amongst the various counties or various entities. Compare that with public safety or economic development. Again, the far right, if they adopted the 1%, again, county-wide, it's $2.4 million. But now you see that the county share is increased to $2 million. And that's just because there's fewer pieces of the pie that you have to distribute it to. So that's something as a county unit that you want to take in consideration when you're increasing these taxes, how much is going to be your share. And then also look at the need of the other entities in your county. Now this new one, new statute, new law that came, I think it's effective this summer, as the correctional rehabilitation facilities. This is unique because it doesn't matter if you're a county council or a Loit council adopting body, the county council can adopt this. Funds must be used for costs associated with correctional and rehabilitation facilities. I've talked to one bond council because my question was, it just says facilities. Does that mean it has to be just for buildings? Can you use it for operating? And the opinion that I got from this one particular bond council says they felt like that it could be. So that's something that if you're looking at, because I know operating costs is, again, it's a huge burden on your general fund for these kind of types of facilities. I would definitely check that with your legal counsel, but based upon one interpretation that I did asked for, they thought it could be included for operational, which I think is a huge benefit for you. The increments may not exceed 0.2%, and this, again, it counts toward your expenditure rate. But the benefit to this, again, is that this point up to 0.2%, it all goes to the county off the top. So again, this is very important for the county because if you adopted this, you don't have to distribute it to the other entities. You could keep 100% of this tax rate, and then what's left gets distributed to the other entities, whether it's certified chairs, public safety, or economic development. So this is a huge, I think, win for counties. I think the reason this was put in place was because there's been so many counties go in front of the legislators and ask for a special rate for jails. That's probably majority of the counties, people sitting here are either have recently built a jail or talking about it or tired of talking about it. So I think that's really what has put that in place is I think the legislators saw these counties constantly, which we hope a lot of them come to the legislators and ask for the special rate, and they were hoping that this would reduce those requests. The thing, that last bullet point there, is only good for 20 years. So that's important if you are thinking about adopting this to maybe build a jail. It can only be good for 20 years. So you may want to time the adoption of this rate when you think you're going to be issuing bonds, if you're going to use this to help pay back bonds for a project. Now my question to the attorney was, okay, well just at the end of 20 years, can you just adopt it again? So I think you could, but that, again, that's another legal question. Yes? Correct. Yes. It would be, if it goes into effect August, it would become effective in October, but you actually wouldn't start collecting revenue until January of 19. Yeah, it's just like the other changes. So that's not any different than increasing or adopting a new tax, right? Yeah. So the questions, I don't know if anyone heard, if I remember right, do you have to, or can you, if you want to increase this 0.2%, can you reduce another tax within your expenditure rate? And the answer is yes. And if you're at your maximum 2.5%, you would have to reduce the tax somewhere else within your expenditure rate to be able to adopt this. You're not required to if you're below the 2.5%, but you definitely have that flexibility. Again, how it's adopted, same procedure. You have to have a public hearing to put this in place, just like if you were to make any other change to your existing income taxes. And then what was the third question that, Barb? What was the third question that I answered? Yeah. Yeah, so same requirements. Yes? Yeah, and I saw that memo, and I know there was one interpretation that they thought that this rate could actually be outside the expenditure rate, so up and above the 2.5%. But looking at the statute, I think it specifically says it's within the expenditure rate, and I confirmed that again with bond counsel, and they also saw that memo, and okay, good. So again, I always talk to your attorneys, but that memo was a little confusing, and so I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, it is within your expenditure rate. But yeah, you do want to be clear in your ordinance. And DLGF, I think you all received the memos for them. They recently submitted, I think a couple weeks ago, sent out a memo of all the different ordinances of the various possibilities. So I strongly recommend looking at those if you're considering adopting or changing one of your income taxes, because they are pretty useful. The other component is the special purpose rate. Again, nothing's changed there. If you want to have that for a specific project, you do have to go to the legislators and ask for that. And it's very specific. It usually talks about it can only be used for like a jail, Sometimes it's just for bonding. Sometimes it can be used for operating as well. Again, this is just kind of something that we put together whenever we're talking with communities about increasing income taxes. It's always important to be transparent, to show what the impact would be. So this is just kind of a typical schedule that we'd show that if you were to increase your tax rate by 0.1, 0.25, or 1%, what kind of impact that would have on various taxpayers with different adjusted gross incomes. And then this is kind of looking at your budget, looking at your projects. This is kind of an analysis that I think it's worthwhile to do if you're looking at doing a project. I know, like I said, many of you are looking at jail projects. So this is something that we've done for communities. Scenario one, looking at a project, we determined that based upon the size of the project, they're going to need about $2.5 million of revenue to cover the bond, the annual payment on the bonds, and then also cover the increase in operating costs. So we looked at 3 different options for them. The first one was, okay, what if you just stayed within your expenditure rate and you increased your public safety tax? We determined that they would have to increase their public safety by 1% to generate that $2.5 million. Keep in mind that public safety, when the county or local income tax body adopts that, that revenue gets distributed, spread out to the county, cities and towns. So the county doesn't get to keep that all 1%. Well, they thought, well, that 1%, that's more than what we want to increase taxpayers by. So let's go to the legislators and ask for 0.65%, because get special purpose rate, they get to keep all of that. You don't have to share it with the other entities. So we determined to generate that $2.5 million, that same $2.5 million, we'd only need a rate of 0.65%. Because, again, the county gets to keep all of that. But for various reasons, we determined that we couldn't get the whole 0.65% or didn't want to get special legislations for that amount. So we thought, okay, well, let's do a combination of both. Now we have this new law in place. If we do 0.2% at the correctional facility, again, the county gets to keep all of that. We still go to the special legislation, ask for 0.25%. County gets to keep all of that. But those two alone still isn't enough to get us to 2.5%. So we're going to have to increase our public safety some. And to get that 2.5, we determined we'd have to increase it by 0.3%. So again, a combination of those 3 tax rates, they would have to increase their rate by about 0.75%. So again, it's more than if they did all through special legislation, but that's not guaranteed. But again, it's less than if they did 100% through just the public safety. So again, there's a benefit for this new law that I think that would be beneficial for counties that are looking at those types of projects. Next couple of slides, as I mentioned, DLGF, their duties, they do assist communities quite a bit in this area because it is complicated. There's 92 counties, there's probably about 92,000 different possibilities that you could choose from. So they do have examples of ordinances. Again, I think a memo came out a couple of weeks, more current ordinances. But they are always, I've called them with questions, and they are very eager to help to make sure those ordinances and resolutions are correct because they know how important that is to show that when they receive it, it is accurate and what you intended to propose. So I strongly, encourage you to reach out to them. Again, we often reach out to them, assisting communities, and so that resource is out there. As far as the approval, as we mentioned, no matter what tax rate you adopt, no matter if it's increasing, changing, reducing, changing allocation, you have to have a public hearing with the proper notification 10 days before that. The other thing is you can only change your rate more one time a year. So when you determine what you want to do, make sure that's what you want to do for the year because you have to wait another year before you can change it to something else. As far as the dates we talked about, again, these are important to know when they're effective. And if you're looking, again, I think these will probably, at least from what I found working with communities, a lot of these discussions are going to occur as you're doing your budgets here the next couple of months. When you start looking at what your circuit breaker impact is going to be for 2019, That's when I find a lot of officials think, wait a minute, we have to do something different. We can't keep on the same path that we have. So they start looking at what options do we have to help with our 2019 budget. So these dates are really important. Again, if you approve it between now and August 31, it becomes effective October 1, which means people start seeing that additional tax taken out of their paycheck then. But also you start not receiving revenue until January 2019. If you wait until September 1 to October 31, it doesn't become effective until January 1, 2019, but you still start collecting revenue January 2019. If you wait until after November, from November to December, before you make a decision, it doesn't become effective until October of the following year, so you wouldn't really see any new revenue until January 2020. So again, this is important, as this is something that your communities may be thinking about. I mean, knowing that you guys understand where your cash flow and where your balances are better than most anyone, you probably already know where you're going to be straining in your budgets already, even before you really started having those preliminary meetings. So those are things that you think your council, commissioners, others may be interested in. It's worth probably maybe planting the seed, because these dates will be here before you know it, and you may miss that opportunity to try to get something in place for 2019. And as we mentioned earlier, it's important to look at, if you are looking at making changes, or whether it's maybe increasing the property tax relief, or changing the allocation, or changing certified shares to seed it because you can get more because there's less pieces of the pie. There's a number of things that you have to think about before you make those decisions. And one is there debt outstanding? Because you just don't have to look at the county, but say if you have certified shares and you want to reduce that and maybe increase edit because the county will get a larger portion of it. Well, you have to look at bonds that are outstanding that were paid from those certified shares, what was called code or a cadget. If you have any debt that's outstanding, or if any cities and towns, townships, libraries have any debt outstanding from those revenue sources, you can't reduce that amount below the amount that would provide 125% coverage on those bonds that are outstanding. Means that, say if you have certified shares and the city within your community has a bond that's outstanding that's payable from certified shares, you can't reduce the revenue more than that would allow them to pay their debt service 1.25 times. So there's some restrictions there. The other thing, again, the impact. I can't tell you enough how important it is to get an understanding of what the impact will be, because you are impacting property tax rates, for the good or bad. So you really need to just be understanding of what that impact will be, so you can present that to your constituents. Because like I said, if you make that decision now, they're really not going to know what that impact is. But come April of next year, they're going to know, and they may be at your door wanting to know why my tax bill increased 100%. Again, outstanding debt is important to look at from all the units, just not your entity. Look at what other counties are using their revenue for. Again, there may be a community that's using all their certified shares just to fund their operating, which is often common. So you have to think about what those decisions might be and how they're going to impact others. Same thing for allocations of expenditure rate. Just again, kind of talking to all the other units. Most of the time, if you're increasing, all the units are going to be in favor of that because they're in the same situation that you are. If you're talking about decreasing circuit breaker losses, they're going to be in favor of that. But once you start talking about changing allocation, well, then there's a good chance there's going to be some winners and losers. That was my last slide. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yes? The question is, can you allocate PTRC on taxing districts? And no, it can only be allocated amongst those different taxpayers, classification of taxpayers. Any other questions? Yes. Are you wanting to increase it or decrease it? Change the purpose. You'd have to go back to those legislators. So next general session. So and again, that has a lot to do with your representatives and if they're in favor of that. So it's something I'd start this fall so they could add that to a bill next spring, or actually this fall, this winter, and then that would go to a vote next spring. And that is something that we have seen some counties do here recently that maybe adopted the tax rate 10, 20 years ago, and maybe it was just for paying bonds. But now that operating cost has become more of a burden on the general fund, so they've gone back to the legislators and have asked, hey, can we use this for not just paying back bonds, but also for operating? There's one county that I know that went back to the legislators that it was allowed for, I think, bonds and operating for their courthouse. They expanded that to include other government facilities and type projects to help fund some other capital needs. So it's not a guarantee, but that's the process. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Every community is different. I know going back to public safety or economic development, as far as how it's divvied up, it's exactly the same. So the county would receive the exact same whether they adopt public safety or economic development. But just because of the name, public safety can only be used for public safety, as it said. Economic development can actually be used for any legal purpose. But just because it's for public safety, it's easier to sell to its constituents because for that reason. So I've been in communities where they've adopted public safety because of what it could be used for. So you're exactly right, kind of what your needs are, and then who your audience is. Right. Yeah, that's what we see often, and even for debt, public safety. Well, originally it couldn't be used for debt, but you've seen some legal opinions now say that public safety can be used for debt payments. But even if you have an attorney that feels like it cannot be used for debt, what you can do is exactly what you said. You could move some stuff expenses out of your general fund or other funds, move it to your public safety fund, and then that frees up money from your general fund or other funds to make debt payments, if that's your goal or need. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, in theory, yeah. It can only be used for that purpose. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it would go into a separate fund, and then that fund could only be used for your PSAP.
It can't be used for your jail, just your PSAP, okay.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and the memo that was sent out, an example, I mean, it's pretty clear, this is of your public safety, you want this percentage for PSAPs. So it specifically states how much you want. Yes. Yes. Yeah, when CETA, when economic development was first put into law, it could only be used for economic development purposes. And then, oh, maybe 15, less than 20 years ago, they changed that to allow it to be used for anything. Mhm. Any other questions? Well, thank you.